committee, but for all Canadians. I believe it touches on a subject that we studied last year, very closely tied to the Arrive scam scandal, which I'm sure our witnesses here today have heard about. And that is the damning report of the procurement ombudsman regarding McKinsey. McKinsey, a company that has over $100 million in contracts with the...
We'll get to it, Mr. Backrack.
Thank you very much. It is relevant. Thank you very much.
No, but it has to be an actual point of order.
I'm waiting for that, Mr. Backrack. Please continue, Mrs. Cusi.
Over $100 million in contract with this Trudeau government. But the most damning piece of this contract, of this report, Mr. Chair, is the fact that the procurement ombudsman found that the government actually bent the rules to favor McKinsey. Something similar we saw in the Arrive scam scandal. Once again, we see this Liberal government favoring their friends and insiders in McKinsey with the report of the procurement ombudsman, as we did in the Arrive scam scandal. Now, this is no surprise.
You get it.
As we have had, of course, the Dominic Barton, who came and testified at this committee, further tying the relevance, who advised Justin Trudeau on the Advisory Council on Economic Growth and their Indo-Pacific Advisory Commission. And then, of course, they went on to, I'm getting to the point, Mr. Chair, if they will allow me to do that.
Is this a point of order? I don't think this is a point of order.
Hey, gentlemen,
no, it's an abuse of the process.
Mr. Backrack, please, I have the floor, Mr. Backrack. I understand, if you allow me to speak. Please, if we could just have silence. Mrs. Cusi, if you can get to your point of order, please.
Yes, of course. And then he went on to create the failed scandal-plagued Canada Infrastructure Bank. And the greatest stain on our society, I believe, currently, Mr. Chair, is his role, McKinsey's role in the opioid crisis, where they had to pay $600 million in damages.
Is this Clips Monday?
So, I think given this report by the procurement ombudsman today, Mr. Chair, that it is absolutely necessary for this committee to hear from the procurement ombudsman regarding this report and from the CBSA once again. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Gentlemen,
Mr. Chair,
please.
if I may, as a point of order?
Yeah, just on that point of order or a different point of order?
Well, I'm just wondering what your ruling will be on the point of order raised by my colleague, Ms. Cusi.
If I could get to it, I could probably make such a ruling. Mrs. Cusi, I appreciate your comments. It is not a point of order. Colleagues, if you have read the report, though, it is pretty...
We agree, but that doesn't have...
I'm glad you agree. It's a just... Let me please. It is a rather damning report. I appreciate Mrs. Cusi's comment, though it is not a point of order. I'm glad that you do agree. Perhaps we've had the ombudsman in before. Okay. My colleagues and Liberals agree with me agreeing. No, I do hope that we will agree that we can get to actually having Mr. Yiglet in NPSBC and perhaps on the report that he's spent the past year doing. And I hope if everyone's fine, we'll find some time to do that.
We're still on the same point of order with the chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Backrack.
Well, I think I share my colleague's concern about the report, and I very much want to see this committee examine that in great detail. My concern is just when points of order are used inappropriately and the chair doesn't cut them off. I don't think that's a latitude that you would allow me or anyone from another party. And so I would just ask in the future that points of order be restricted to actual points of order. And I think all parties are guilty of that at different times, but it's just frustrating, and it's a frustrating way to start an important meeting. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Yeah, I should have cut you off halfway through. No, I understand what you're saying. I've allowed wide latitude on other point of orders. I agree, but this one is certainly not a point of order. But I'm glad that you agreeing with me and Mr. Jouari that perhaps we do need to bring Mr. Yiglet and PSPC on that report. So we'll leave it at that if everyone's fine. We will now get to our witness statement. Ms. Simpson, we'll start with you for 5 minutes for the opening statement.
Okay, no problem. So good morning, committee members.
First, I would like to acknowledge the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation on whose traditional unceded territory we are gathered today. On behalf of more than 55,000 members of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, I want to thank the committee for the invitation and for the opportunity to share CUPW's vision and values with you. We represent workers across every region of our country, including many rural and remote areas. Today, I sit before you to shed light on a crucial yet often overlooked aspect of Canada's public infrastructure, the Postal Service and its integral role in our rural and remote communities. While we often associate the Postal Service with delivering letters, its significance extends far beyond delivery. In rural and remote areas where traditional infrastructures might be lacking, the Postal Service plays an invaluable role connecting communities, fostering equity and inclusion, and driving local economies. First and foremost, let's acknowledge that Canada is a vast country with diverse geography, encompassing sprawling rural landscapes and isolated regions. In these areas, accessing the goods services we take for granted in urban areas can be a challenge. However, with a rural network unparalleled in scope, the Postal Service bridges the gap by providing reliable mail delivery, ensuring that rural residents have access to communication, goods and services, no matter where they live. From medication and medical supplies to online purchases, government correspondences and groceries, the Postal Service ensures that people living in rural and remote communities have equitable access to the resources they need to thrive. In an era of increasing digital communication, the Rural Post Office Service remains as relevant as ever, both economically and socially. In recent years, we have seen parcel volumes grow faster in rural Canada than they have in urban areas. With low population density and high delivery cost, much of rural Canada is significantly underserved by Canada Post private sector competitors. In fact, its competitors have turned to Canada Post for the last mile of rural delivery. Clearly, without the rural postal services, the private sector is not going to fill the gap. The loss of postal services in rural and remote community means the loss of key drivers of local economic development. The Postal Service employs more than 10,000 rural Canadians, providing them with the kind of good-paying unionized jobs that is now far too uncommon. Supporting the Rural Postal Service means good-paying jobs which supports postal workers, their families, communities, and local businesses. The Rural Post Office is a community hub. It is not only a place where people pick up the mail, it is also a place where people gather to connect with their neighbors and hear about local news and events. The Rural Post Office is a place to share knowledge and build community. Across so much of this country, no one knows more about their community than postal workers. We live in an age of the internet, but in too much of rural and remote Canada, internet connection remains spotty, if at all exists. With its vast network of offices, the Rural Postal Service has the potential to play an even bigger role in connecting communities and helping people stay informed. Post offices could be used to enhance access to the internet where it is currently lacking. In many communities, the post office is the only face of the federal government. The post office reinforces a sense of belonging to a wider community, to a shared sense of what it means to be Canadian. When a post office closes, community lose perhaps their only physical link to their government. As postal workers, we are proud to provide a public service to all citizens, but we know that Rural Postal Service has the potential to do even more. With a presence in every community, post offices could be used to offer access to government services and banking services. We could bring back the Food North program to promote reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. Based on the government's public opinion polling, we know that service expansion is a popular idea. For all those reasons and more, CUPW has for many years maintained that the moratorium protecting rural postal service closures needs to be strengthened. Hundreds of post offices have been closed since the 1994 moratorium. In conclusion, the Postal Service is not just a logistics operation, it's a cornerstone of community resilience and inclusivity. Its presence in Canada's rural and remote areas ensures that no one is left behind, regardless of where they live. As we navigate an ever-changing landscape, let us remember the unique role of the Postal Service in fostering connectivity, supporting economic development, and upholding the values of equity and inclusion in our society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Simpson. Mr. Jones, please, for 5 minutes.
Good morning. I want to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak about a subject that is important to me individually, important to CPAA, which I'll call the association in my remarks, and important to all people living in rural Canada. The association represents more than 8,500 employees at Canada Post, and I can say with pride that we only represent employees working in the corporation's rural offices. Our members work in nearly 3,000 post offices. Those offices range from small operations in people's homes, general stores in municipal buildings, to larger operations in larger towns. Many of the post offices are extremely remote communities and including fly-in and boat-in locations. A significant number of our members supply the premise for the post office largely at their own cost, receiving a small leasing allowance for doing so. CPA was formed a little over 3 decades after Confederation in 1902. At that time, rural post offices were both the center and lifeblood of rural communities. The same is true today. Many Canadians living in urban locations can and often do take postal and other delivery services for granted. In rural Canada, the options for sending and receiving the necessities of life are much more limited. At no time was this more clear than during COVID pandemic. During those most challenging times, the ability to get food, get medication, and other essentials in thousands of communities was completely dependent on Canada Post rural offices. Workers went into CPA offices day after day, week after week, understanding that they were putting their health and perhaps their lives in serious jeopardy. They were doing so because they were considered by the government, by their employer, and by their communities to be performing an essential service. It may have taken a pandemic for some Canadians to understand the importance of a post office, but most people outside of big cities already knew the central place that post office and postal services hold. Post offices allow businesses to reach out to the world from remote areas. They allow local operations to grow. They prevent migration out of smaller communities by offering residents in rural Canada access to services and goods. Even in an age of internet, they allow federal, provincial, and municipal governments to communicate with residents in those rural communities. In rural Canada, Canada Post has the ability to help those communities grow. We have been spearheading initiatives to offer more services and more diverse ones. This includes using those offices as financial service hubs. Postal banking was a service that our post offices offered during much of the last century. Some banks moved in and recently have decided they are not willing to invest in those services or those communities. Canada Post has started offering them again on a small scale, and we believe so much more is possible. A post office is also an affirmation of our commitment to one another as citizens of Canada. From Old Pelican, Newfoundland to Bella Coola, British Columbia, from Kugluktuk, Nunavut, to Bromo, Quebec. The Canadian flag on each post office is a sign that Canada respects and serves all, no matter where they live. We should also remember Canada's commitment to Indigenous communities, many if not most of which are in rural and remote communities in Canada. The need to ensure access to the complete range of postal services and facilities in those communities is part of Canada's fundamental obligation. Canada Post recognizes this obligation as part of its commitment to an Indigenous and Northern reconciliation strategy. I worked in CPA post offices in Alberta before I took my responsibilities with the association. There and in every CPA office that I have visited, I have seen firsthand the dedication that our members in rural Canada bring to their work. They do so because they understand the importance of what they do. They do for their neighbors, they do it for their families, for farmers or small business owners, and through these people and other people for all Canadians. For decades, the association has been resisting the efforts of Canada Post to reduce services to rural Canada. In the 90s, we worked with other organizations to help people understand what was at stake if rural Canadians were stripped of their basic services. We received a promise from the federal government that there would be a moratorium on office closures. Even with the moratorium, Canada Post has closed hundreds of offices over the past 15 years. We are worried that we are at risk of returning to those difficult times. Our members have had their working hours cut to the barest minimum needed to get the job done, or below that. In absence of a will to support rural Canada, we worry that office closures and cuts in service may now be back on the table. We are sure the committee understands the importance of maintaining postal services to all Canadians. The association urges the government and each of the federal parties to ensure rural Canadians can continue to live in security and dignity and receive the levels of postal service that will allow them to continue to participate fully in Canadian society. I am passionate about these issues because I understand the need for rural post offices and the services they provide, as well as the importance of those services in the daily lives of hundreds of thousands of Canadians. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Jones. We'll start with Mrs. Block for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my questions will be posed for either one of the witnesses to answer. I represent a very large rural riding in the province of Saskatchewan with many small communities that, as you both have pointed out, appreciate the post offices within their communities. But in my riding, I have a community that has been forced to fundraise in order to have their post office and to provide the service level that they not only desire but need. Have you heard of any other communities or post offices that require fundraising in order to operate at the required level for a community?
We've had some of our offices which are known as a group office, and primarily that's a single person office. In smaller communities, they have a leasing allowance stipend that they receive on a monthly basis over the course of a year. And a lot of times they find that that leasing allowance doesn't support the full cost of operating the post office. So communities have banded together once they realize that anything over and above, they do have an option with Canada Post to request to have that leasing allowance increased, but it's not always guaranteed. We've seen many turn down on areas that don't have other facilities they can operate in. So what they end up doing is they speak with the landlord, and sometimes municipalities have banded together to try to reduce costs for those post offices to remain.
So that's an interesting issue that you raise, and I know my colleague Mr. Bachrach asked about the what Canada Post is willing to pay when it comes to leasing an office in a smaller community. Have any of your members who work at rural postal offices raised these concerns with you about the lack of funding for the role of the post office in their community and how this impacts their ability to support the community? And I would welcome Ms. Simpson or Ms. Tobin to also answer the question.
Okay. So I can speak from a CPA perspective. We have a survey that we're conducting. We've had over 300 surveys that have gone out to group postmasters. To date, we don't have all the responses back, but it's appearing about $32,000 a month shortfall is what's coming back from these group postmasters. That they're paying out of pocket in order to maintain that post office. Again, this is something that we've had individual postmasters communicate through our national office to request, in accordance with their collective agreement, an increase to that amount, which we take to Canada Post and we present on their behalf when they, with all the expenses and revenue laid out. Like I said earlier, there's not a big uptake on it from the corporation in agreement to. Some are agreed to and some are denied. This is something that we're listening to the members and we're pushing when they are able to supply us with that information. So,
have the amounts that Canada Post is willing to pay to lease a space in a rural community increased over the last couple of decades?
So I can speak to that, and I'll just give you an idea. So we've got an appendix in our collective agreement, and the leasing allowance for a Group 1 postmaster, the rates as of April 1st, 2023 to operate a post office yearly would be $13.57. That has come up since April 1st, 2019 from $12.29. So there's been a small adjust yearly over, but not substantial amount in order to offset that expense. There's more numbers just depending on the size of the group office.
So what does that do to the morale of members of your unions when they know that rural post office workers are having to fundraise to support their jobs or aren't being heard when they're asking for these increases?
I think the biggest thing is they feel undervalued, for one, because they're providing, and they are, when I said that they were dedicated and committed, they are very much so, because they're integrated in that community. So they're serving family, they're serving friends, they're serving neighbors. So the level of service they bring is they give 110%. When they don't receive that back, where even the basic operating costs are covered, it's not a slap in the face, but you feel undervalued for what you're pouring in. You're feeling like your contribution isn't being equally valued among some colleagues in other locations.
Thank you. Do I have any more time?
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Satwin, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and hello to all my committee members today. And thank you to our witnesses. Really incredible opening statements. I had a lot of pride for Canada as you were speaking this morning, so thank you so much for that. I'm going to begin with Mr. Jones. Considering Canada Post's financial situation, what do you feel are the key priorities to ensuring that Canada Post is financially stable and provides quality service to all Canadians, regardless of where they live?
One of the things I would like to mention is the many times when our postmasters are delivering a parcel in rural or remote Canada, the accounting of the revenue that's brought in for delivering that parcel isn't attributed to that office that's delivering that parcel. It's accounted for at the urban center where they were able to induct that into the mail stream. So without the delivery on the receiving end, they would never have made the sale of that parcel or piece of mail that they're sending to that recipient. So one, I would like an overall or I would like Canada Post to recognize the importance of looking at the from end-to-end delivery when they're looking at what revenue is being brought in.
Great, thank you. And Ms. Simpson, would you have anything to add to that?
Thank you very much for your question. For us as well, we know expansion of services is really important at Canada Post. As Dwayne mentioned in his opening, Canada Post offered postal banking up until the late 1960s, and we know we can do that again. Many banks during COVID have left smaller remote areas, and people are underbanked. The payday lenders that are there now are gouging our young people as well as those who are underbanked at this time. So expansion of services is called our Delivering Community Power campaign. It talks about postal banking, a community hub. We opened one in Member 2 in the Atlantic region, also in Quebec, and also in the Prairie region as well. It also talks about the community hub where you can meet with your neighbors also. We have electric vehicles there to help with the environment, as well as senior check-in services where we can go door to door and make sure seniors can live with dignity in their own homes as well, and also for Canada Post to green and maybe change their vehicles as well. So for us, expansion of services is a way that Canada Post can ensure that nobody's left behind in the remote areas.
Well, thank you very much. I have some very active members of QPW here in the Fredericton region, and I know all about this incredible program, and I very much support it, so thank you so much. I've got in front of me, it's the third quarter financial report. And it mentions, demand for e-commerce parcels continuing to grow. Rate shopping is putting pressure on price. Expenditures for service performance, delivery speeds, and flexible delivery options, including weekend, same day, and next day delivery, are on the rise. Merchants face pressure to compete on overall experience. Competitors are also using low-cost gig economy and contracted labor to offer cost-effective delivery solutions while increasing the delivery speeds. And so QPW Our CPUW has previously stated that Canada Post sales software encourages offering customers the premium services like Express Post first, then the regular services. So, Ms. Simpson, could you explain the different levels of service for parcel deliveries and how the cost discrepancies can disproportionately affect rural and remote Canadians?
Thank you very much for your question. So Canada Post offers different services. Express Post, depending on what area you live in, can be next day or 2-day delivery. You also have expedited services, which are offered to small businesses, and that is a very similar service to the express service. And regular door-to-door parcel delivery might take 3 to 4 days, depending on where you are, if you're in a rural or suburban area as well. So I think for a lot of people, the cost of sending a parcel might be a bit higher if they're just doing the regular service and taking day to day. So I think Canada Post should help to if we deliver at the door as well, so therefore we can have the costs come down because we bring the letter mail and your parcel and other services all in one package together. So that's one way we can look at it, as well as helping to help the remote areas do the delivery of their parcels.
Excellent, thank you. And from this same section, and this one will be for Mr. Jones, it mentions compensation restrictions due to government policy are making it increasingly difficult to attract and retain top talent. So could you comment on that or elaborate further and maybe provide us with some advice or some recommendations to potentially avoid some of these pitfalls?
So one of the things that we have found with Canada Post, it used to be years ago that the starting salary was a considerable increase to other jobs or opportunities that they may find in the within their community. We find that that's not the case nowadays. There's been some slight increases over the years, but not keeping up if you consider the cost of living allowance has increased. We look at other communities, other organizations within the community starting at higher salaries to try to draw that talent in. So one is, I think that we need to seriously look at the starting wages for employees as well as maintaining benefits. That is something that's sought after for Canadians, and it's important to them. Many of our communities, they have to travel to get medical services, so to have somewhat of a benefit to offset some of that expense is important.
Excellent, thank you. And would Ms. Simpson have anything to add to that question?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity.
Just briefly, please, 20 seconds.
Yeah, for us, we have to negotiate a living wage for everybody, a good, sustainable job, which Canada Post was and still needs to be. So we're bargaining for your public post office and for our jobs, and to ensure that the next generation has a good unionized job.
Thanks very much. Mrs. Vignola, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, our witnesses, thank you for being with us today. The association, the CUPW, is struggling to meet financial needs without having to cut jobs and close post offices. What maintains the viability of your services? You have explained the realities of these rural areas, and I have experienced this in my region when I was young. I lived in Fermont at a time when there were no roads to access the area. So it was not easy to receive all our parcels by mail, actually by air mail. And sometimes by train, which was not very frequent. What solutions does the CUPW bring to the table in order to ensure that medical products, school products arrive to these rural areas and remote areas, because oftentimes that's the only way they access these necessities? So what suggestions do you have?
Merci pour votre question.
Thank you for your question. I'll speak English.
So for CUPW, we know that we're many times the only place in a community that actually comes to the door. So it's very important for us to maintain our last mile delivery. As I mentioned in my intervention earlier on, many of the private courier companies use us to deliver the last mile in the communities which you speak of. I know in the province of Quebec, there was a gentleman who actually used, I think, a boat as well as a helicopter to deliver the mail. So it's very important for us as postal workers to ensure that Canada Post, brings back for those who lost door-to-door delivery and ensure that those who have it keep it as well. So for us, it's ensuring that we deliver the parcels to the door along with the other products which people require as well.
So that's what you would like to see. That's what citizens want to see as well. But what potential solutions exist to ensure that this service be made possible? Because right now, in certain areas, we're considering going back to what we had 100 years ago, that is dog sleds to finish these deliveries and those final kilometers. So how can we ensure that these basic necessities, such as clothes and medical supplies, are making it to these areas on time, which is not necessarily the case right now? So what solutions do you have to suggest?
Merci. So for us, postal workers are not paid by any tax dollars, but postal workers are taxpayers. And if you eliminate jobs, it's going to eliminate monies coming into the communities to help with the infrastructure, to build roads, and to help ensure that there's delivery to the front door of all the Canadian public. Also, the service charter mandates innovation, expansion of services to meet people's changing needs. So we are pushing Canada Post to do expansion of services to ensure that nobody's left behind.
Merci.
Thank you. We've heard it being spoken about a potential study or project that would use drones to actually deliver mail to these rural and remote areas. Is your union considering this solution, and what would this imply for the union in terms of employee training and engagement?
Anytime that technology happens at any company, especially at CUPW with Canada Post, we have what's called consultation and tech chains. It's very important that postal workers are included in any decisions made to do that kind of different work to ensure that postal workers' health and safety is prioritized with the delivery of drones. But we also know that drones and automation do not pay money or pay taxes back into the community. So therefore, for us, it's important to keep good unionized jobs in place, but also have technology that ensures workers are not left behind and nobody's injured.
Merci.
Thank you. Very quickly, when a post office is closed, is your union consulted with beforehand?
For us, we need to have meaningful consultations because a lot of times decisions are made and then we're advised. So for us, meaningful consultation is what is needed, and we can offer ideas to help expand services at those post offices to avoid the closures.
Est-ce que vous avez...
Do you have meetings with them? I'm not talking about what your needs are, but right now, when they announce that a post office is being closed, is your union automatically consulted with?
We're not always consulted at the beginning of the process. Might be consulted at different parts of the process. But whenever they consult us at the beginning of the process, we're able to work together and to have a solution where postal services are not lost in remote areas.
Une question.
Another quick question, a yes or no question. Do you have the list of the 600 post offices that were closed since the moratorium was implemented?
I could get back to you at my office and provide you with the list that we have. I don't know if we have an accurate list at this time, but we definitely would be able to provide that.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bachrach, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both of our witnesses. This is an issue that is very much on the minds of people and communities in Northwest BC. I know Mr. Jones noted Bella Coola, which of course is in the beautiful riding that I represent and relies heavily on rural post office service. Right across the northwest of British Columbia, small post offices are a lifeline for people. I'm here today in the village of Dodging Guides on Haida Gwaii, another rural post office. I'm actually using their council chambers this morning for this meeting. So thinking about the service that both CUPW employees and rural postmasters provide and how we sustain those over time. And I was really quite shocked at our last meeting to learn that 600 post offices have closed across Canada since the 1994 moratorium was put in place. And perhaps I'll start my questioning with a question to Mr. Jones, if he can lay out the mechanism by which Canada Post allows post offices to close in the face of the moratorium. How is this allowed to take place? What are the steps that we see occur? Because I think there are some trends that we see across rural Canada when we see communities go from having a proper rural post office, a Canada Post post office, to a mailbox on the side of the road. Mr. Jones, could you talk a little bit about what we're seeing in terms of that erosion of service?
So many times Canada Post will reach out through their community outreach program into the community, and when they're speaking with representatives in the community, they will talk about postal service but fail to mention the maintaining the same level of service. And I'll give an example. Being able to go into a post office and receive all services and all products available through that local post office isn't the same as having to drive 70 kilometers to go pick up a parcel and perhaps stop at a local retail outlet to purchase stamps. It's not the same service. So when it comes to their community outreach, they'll speak about postal service but fail to mention the maintaining the same level of service that they've received for years. With that comes a notification to the association, and it should be, if they've gotten to the point where it's a temporary closure, they would normally reach out and identify a temporary closure. We would, of course, like to have consultation, and as my friend and colleague has mentioned, a meaningful consultation is the key word there, because many times what we're bringing as supporting information into that meeting is falling on deaf ears. So it's important that they hear that in order to maintain that post office, there may be some times where they have to look at another suitable premise that can operate at a lower expense. And if that's the case, if it's a suitable premise, then you would have to relocate or look at readjusting with that leasing. Maybe perhaps it's increasing the leasing allowance that's identified under the Appendix I in our collective agreement. But usually what would happen is they would reach out to the community, and that's where we would want to make sure that the community receives full disclosure on all levels of service within a post office. And that's something that I would want to emphasize, because again, just talking about a postal service isn't talking about all levels of service. So
we see communities go from having a Canada Post office to having a contracted out franchise situation with a local business. Do we ever see the opposite occur? Do we see services that have been contracted out brought back in-house, or is it largely a one-way street?
So if I may, many times when the local franchise, when they decide to close, many times that's the nail in the coffin for the postal outlet in that community, sadly, and they've lost that federal presence within that community. So that's where, just because it's opened in a retail postal outlet doesn't mean they're going to maintain a post office in that community for years to come. It's contingent on that the owner-operator of that local retail.
Now, Canada Post often struggles, when they lose a postmaster in a rural community, either through, for instance, the death of a postmaster in those tragic situations, or a fire, they seem to struggle to recruit new rural postmasters. What are the main reasons that Canada Post struggles to recruit new postmasters in small communities?
It would be interesting to see the approach taken if we weren't running two parallels on trying to set up a system to deliver without that post office in the community. I would like to see the level of approach that the corporation would take if they were 100% wanting to see that post office remain in the community. I'm sorry, but the amount of effort that's put behind the steps that are taken are kind of a clear indicator in the beginning stages on where you want to go with that community. If it's maintaining a level, then start to reach out and look at all avenues that are available to the community. We've seen
Mr. Joseph?
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to try to fit in one more question, but I hear the chair cutting me off. I was getting over ambitious there. Thank you very much for your answers.
My apologies.
Mr. Chair.
Thanks for cutting him off for me, Mr. Backrack. We'll go to our next final round. We'll start with Mrs. Kusi for 5, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I want to go back to the employment data that's being collected regarding Canada Post, because I believe it has a significant impact on your compensation. In 2021, Canada Post changed how it reported employment figures by including full-time, part-time, temporary, casual, and turn employees rather than just full and part-time. Do you feel that this diminishes the accuracy of the data?
If the question is directed to myself,
yeah, either of you.
Okay, so
as leaders in the postal community.
From what we've experienced, anytime you're starting somebody out, and currently in our collective agreement, there's a what's being referred to as a 2-tier wage system. And so and our collective agreement is on the website, so it's public. To start somebody out at a reduced amount when it's literally, and I won't say pennies, but when it's just above minimum wage, it's really hard to attract and maintain a workforce, a viable workforce. So that's something that I think needs to be looked at, because we've seen where in remote areas, and I'll speak even up north, Iqaluit, for example, in Nunavut, is something where we've had to look at the idea of a starting salary and a livable wage. So,
yeah, also for us, for CUPW members, as Dwayne said, you have the temporary workers at a 2-tier wage was implemented by the Harper government, and we see many young workers left behind there because they're not guaranteed hours. So through this, we need to negotiate. Everybody gets a living wage, and we all know the economy has really fallen behind. We've all fallen behind. So then a lot of workers who are temporary workers then leave because they don't get enough hours to support themselves or their families. So there's a high turnover in temporary workers. So that's the problem we face. Like Dwayne said, the lower start wage, the unsecure number of hours that you're required. And these workers don't have the proper benefits and pension that they deserve, even though they're doing the exact same work side by side with a coworker who's a full-time or part-time employee.
Thank you for that. I think speaking truth to power is something that we really focus here in this committee. Compensation costs for executives have increased from $10 million in 2015 to $15 million in 2022. Are you aware if this is because the salaries and bonuses of executives have increased, or is the number of executive positions increased?
I can speak for my members, and they have not received that kind of increase. We're in negotiations right now. Okay. Canada Post has their compensation models for the executives, which we all know they all receive bonuses throughout the pandemic. So for me, I would ask you to speak to Canada Post about their compensation plan for their upper management. But for postal workers, we know that many are falling behind with the lower start wages that were implemented in previous years and continue to be implemented, and to get rid of the 2-tier wage system and the number of hours required for a worker to become a full-time worker and receive the proper benefits which they deserve, same as their co-workers. And many of the workers who are left behind are young workers, racialized workers, women, and Indigenous workers as well, those who are part of equity-seeking groups.
I think, this is to my point exactly, that it would be frustrating, I believe, in your positions to see executive compensation in a $5 million increase over 7 years when you're talking about new workers being given a wage which is barely above minimum. Do you feel executives are increasing their own compensation rather than focusing on the compensation of employees and the success of the company at large? Maybe that's a two-part question. Do you think that they are increasing their own compensation rather than focusing on the compensation of employees? Do you think when they are receiving these additional funds, $5 million, they are also giving consideration to the team of workers who serves Canadians across the country?
Like I said, we're in bargaining right now. We hope the government allows us to bargain a good, fair collective agreement with where people have a living wage and able to have a defined benefit pension plan. We know, members of parliament all receive a good pension plan within a short period of time of being here. For postal workers, many have made it their career, and they deserve to retire in dignity. All Canadians deserve a living wage, and all Canadians deserve to retire in dignity as well. So hopefully at this round of bargaining, we're bargaining for the public post office and our work, that the wages will be brought up to a proper wage so that everybody could live with dignity.
And that's my time, Mr. Chair. Thank you all.
Thanks very much. Mr. Kuzmirchuk, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we're talking about supporting rural communities. And today, Canadians from coast to coast to coast will be receiving the Canada Carbon Rebate. Some of that will be delivered directly into bank deposits and accounts, and some of that, of course, are post work. Sorry?
Is this relevant to the topic?
Thank you. And of course, we know that our carriers will be delivering some of those checks individually to Canadians as well. And so families in Ontario will be receiving the first of quarterly payments that will add up to about $1,120. And in Alberta, a family of four will receive $1,800, the first quarterly payments that will add up to $1,800. Now, it's unfortunate because right now the Conservatives in committee are holding up the rural top-up, which would add hundreds more additional dollars in the pockets of rural families across this country. And again, the Conservatives are holding up those rural top-ups of the Canada Carbon Rebate. 3 out of the 4 parties around this table believe in climate change. And I certainly know that the members of CUPW believe in climate change. And because they are at the front line of that battle against climate change, they see it on a day-to-day basis. Last year in 2023, 17 million hectares of forest was burned in Canada. And smoke, we felt the smoke, we saw it, we tasted it, we felt it.
Point of order,
even
Mr.
in
Chair.
Communities like mine in Windsor.
Sorry,
when
I'll
a thick
stop
blanket
at
of
that, Mr. Kuzmirchuk. Point of order.
I just wanted to make sure Mr. Kuzmirchuk came to the right room today. It seems like he thinks we're in a different committee, so I just want to clarify that we're in the Government Operations Committee in room 025.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Jim.
West Block. I hope that's helpful to the committees.
Please go ahead, Mr. Kuzmirchuk.
So I know that obviously climate change, and especially the forest fires and the thick smoke that we saw blanketing our communities, including my community in Windsor, we know it has an impact on letter carriers really across the country. And so I wanted to ask you, there were 150 mail delivery interruptions last year over a 6-month period due to wildfires and floods and climate change. I wanted to ask you, from your vantage point, what are the impacts of severe weather events on services to rural and remote communities and to our letter carriers as well, too?
Good question.
So I can't speak to letter carriers, but I can speak to some of the rural communities that were being relocated because of fires or just evacuation orders that were being brought in. Our members were going above and beyond in regards to trying to forward their mail to other local points that those people could pick up so they can maintain a sense of normalcy during it. We were disappointed to hear that the employees in some of those locations were being asked to use their own personal leave through a situation where they were being evacuated out of an area. So that we found very disheartening that they were being pressed upon to do that. So.
Yes, and for us, many letter carriers who deliver the mail, we've seen in the wintertime with the thaws and freezing happening, many slip, trips, and falls and health and safety issues happening there. And Canada Post asking these workers to suppress these injuries and self-accommodate and not going through the proper channel, because we know if we get injured today, it could, lead to a long-term injury later on if you do not report it. And therefore, these workers are being afraid to report their injuries, which they have. And delivering throughout the pandemic as well as through the smoke, we need to provide proper health and safety equipment for the workers. And if it's not safe to go out, Canada Post has the ability to have the workers not go out on those days to deliver the mail. You mentioned around the gas, too. Many rural and suburban mail carriers, the majority who are women, provide their own vehicles, and we want Canada Post, through our Delivering Community Power campaign, to provide electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles to help take away some of the carbon in the environment as well. So for us, Delivering Community Power is a campaign which allows Canada Post to do the transformation to a more electric fleet, as well as have electric charging stations to encourage customers to come to the retail postal counters, plug their vehicles in there, as well as do their shopping as well.
Thank you very much. And I believe I only have 30 seconds left for a question. So just a quick one. In the analysis that we received, it says that overall on-time service performance for domestic letter mail delivery was 93%, which was an improvement over the previous year of about 2%. What can you attribute that excellent performance to?
In 5 seconds.
Postal workers love their jobs and they love the Canadian public.
Perfect. Thanks, Ms. Simpson. Mrs. Vignola, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Simpson. Mr. Jones. Canada Post, every 5 years, needs to review its postal service protocol. This should have been done in 2023. Sorry? What was that? Thank you. We've been told that it's in the works right now, it's being prepared, but that there won't be any significant change. That being because the protocol is working well. Except when I look at the reality on the ground, I think it's hard to believe that the protocol is working as well as they say. When I think about what's going on over the past 5 years with the union, the improvement in service and the diversity of services, I don't see how we can consider that a protocol that was established in 2009 and hasn't been renewed since then is adequate. Are unions involved in the analysis of the Canadian Postal Service protocol? Or are you simply informed of what happened after it's already been done?
So many times it takes the latter, where being informed. When you are meeting with the corporation and able to input in, the last is what I would draw from is the numbers out of the 2016 executive summary that was presented. And the services that are owned and operated as a public service, 88% of Canadians and 83% of businesses in rural communities believe that the mail is highly important and that Canada will always need a postal service. So we know the demand is there. It's a matter of trying to make it fit within those communities, and that's where, again, I'll speak from our behalf from CPA, because in rural, you don't have a lot of the additional providers that you have to contend with. So sometimes they're the only provider